It says if we have differences, it's okay in the political world, but that does not mean we can't live and coexist in peace. He said tuache wananchi washafanya yao, sasa wacha tufanye yetu. Yes, sir. Let's begin with the ladies first.
Thank you. And actually, yesterday I listened to President Uhuru Kenyatta's speech and the Deputy President's speech, and they were very clear on the message they were passing to Kenyans. And one of the items I picked is that we have undergone an electoral process which has now come to conclusion, and time has come for Kenyans to come together to build the nation. The President said that he is ready, willing and able to discuss and converse with Kenyans, and I think that includes the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. And what the message is that we don't have to continue fighting because we have won an election. We've gone to the Supreme Court. It has been able to affirm that win. So let us swear in the President tomorrow, and let's go back to Parliament, those who are in Parliament, so that they can represent our people and raise issues that affect Kenyans day in, day out, and together with their county assemblies. So I think it's okay, and the message was very clear, and I want to believe that everybody, including the opposition, have gotten the message, and they're going to abide by the message that the President gave yesterday. So it's a very good thing for Kenyans and a good start for Jubilee.
David, your thoughts?
Well, I think the President had a thinly veiled message that almost wants to look like reaching out, but isn't really reaching out. He wanted to seem as though he has reached out, but he really quite did not reach out. When you say the citizens have done their bit, let us now do our bit, then we don't know whether doing your bit is being sworn in and moving on. You know, it reminded me of how young people, as they fall in love, one person comes and says, I like you a lot. In fact, you know, you really make me happy. And then you go home thinking he said he loves you. And those two are very different things.
Right.
So I think the President needs to be very clear if he wants to reach out. One, I'm sure he knows the address of the opposition leader. And two, I think they have a relationship at a personal level. If he wanted to pass that message publicly, because what he did was for public consumption, there are things leaders do out there so that they are seen to have reached out. If he wanted the public to go back home from church believing that he has reached out, what he was to do was to say, and I take this opportunity right now to reach out to my brother Raila Odinga. Come, let's sit down and see whether we can move the country forward. Now, that would have been a very clear I love you statement, quote unquote, that you go back home knowing doubtlessly what his intentions are, and that way he is able to assuage the NASA, support base. But what he did almost seems like he could reach out, and then I think the Standard, of course, has very brilliant editors who have spinned it to look like he has reached out, but know very well that he quite did not reach out. Yet he must reach out. Where we are right now is rather precarious for the country. And you may move on. Kwendo Panga did a wonderful masterpiece over the weekend on what must happen. And that you may think it's over. But as I said earlier, and I've said before umpteen times, legitimacy confers on legality. So you may end up being, legally elected. But so long as half of the country feels that you do not represent them, what you may end up having is chaos. It may be calm for now, and then it will rupture at some point. You do not want that. You want to walk to any part of this country and be appreciated as their leader. And you only do that by climbing down and saying, fine, we've had our differences. The ruling has been made. That's the law. I'm going to be president, but I am going to bring you in. Of course, over the weekend I had tons of rumors, that the president is trying to appoint even Dr. Oburu Odinga to be a CS and stuff like that. But that for me still, those are just rumors, and that is not representative of inclusion. So it's about time the president has a sitting, humble himself, look for Raila Odinga wherever he is. I'm told power, the power relations, I am a student of power politics and policy. Power relations mean that when you go to where someone is, you acknowledge they have some power. So go to where the opposition leader is. meet him there and ask him, what must I do so that you and your support base feels included?
All right, Mark?
You know, the funniest thing what Osianya has just described is when you apologize to someone and then they tell you, you didn't apologize the way I wanted. You didn't seem sorry enough. You didn't cry enough. You know, you can't measure sincerity of a statement based on what you personally decide to be what is considered reaching out. And let me say it like this. At a situation like this, you take what you're given as a country. We cannot look the gift horse in the mouth. You can't. You either take the horse or you look at it in the mouth and realize it has very bad teeth. That's what you're trying to do. And we can't be nitpicking at this particular time. We cannot be splitting hairs about how genuine a statement is. And the reality of the matter is this. If Kenya is a marriage, then a marriage only stays together if we talk together. And that's what the president is trying to do. And for me, and I've said so many times, dialogue is not about two people. It's not about Uhuru and Raila. Dialogue is actually about this entire nation. It is the question that we need to ask yourself, that why does a young man have to think about the tribe of his bride before he introduces him to his mother and father? That is what we need to address. We need to address that we are functionally literate about each other's culture. Today, if you take Osiani here, for example, and you are to tell him that he is going to attend a function for the Mijikenda, we have no idea, because we've not been taught what it is to celebrate the cultures of other people. Because listen, hate only exists where you don't understand a thing, and it's because we don't understand each other that we hate each other. This is not a political crisis, by the way. It is simply a moral and a societal issue that we've never dealt with. So what are we supposed to do? It's very simple. Can we transport people from Bungoma, okay, to Kiambu, have a Luya night in the middle of Kiambu, and teach people in Kiambu about how to be Luya? You understand? And do the same thing for the Mijikenda and the Dorobo and the Kisi. That's what we need to focus on. A dialogue about, listen, can I understand you? And if I understand you, then our politics cannot divide us. That's where we need to go. And let's not nitpick and split hairs about what people say.
The other question would be, you know, even before the elections, there was all this talk and calls for dialogue, and so the question is, most people, and even just judging by just the social media response to these statements, was that it's a little too late.
Let me first ask my brother Mark not to reduce what we are going through to a mere misunderstanding or understanding of cultures. Let me tell him that this political crisis stems from a very serious problem of feeling excluded, parts of the country feeling excluded over the years, and that these historical injustices were not merely based on us not understanding each other. That if I do not understand the Meru culture of Florence here, then that misunderstanding can be a reason for this political crisis. That's not it at all. Far from it. The political crisis we face today is that of a people feeling excluded from the processes of governance of a country, feeling excluded and marginalized as the economic blueprint of this country has been done, so that it has edified other parts of the country but left out other parts of the country. Now, this is indeed, I agree with him, this is about the 45 million Kenyans, the 19 or 25 million voters plus. But these voters have hinged their hopes and trust in these two people primarily, in Raila Odinga and in Uhuru Kenyatta. They are therefore representatives of these two sections of the country. That is essentially why they must talk. They must talk, though, bringing onto the table not merely their ambitions, but those of the Kenyans that they represent. That's where he needs to alter that statement. That yes, when they talk, this cannot afford to be merely about the two of them. Far from it. It must be about the Kenyans that they represent and the genuine desire for a transformational nation.
So let me allow Florence to chime in and I'll come to you, Mark.
No, first of all, let me say that the president has already extended his arm of friendship to each and every person or candidate who vied in the last elections, and he has invited them for tomorrow's function. He's telling them, come, let us celebrate together, so that we can have decide on the way forward. Because I believe that the president is going to tell Kenyans tomorrow where he wants to take the country in as far as the economy is concerned, in as far as employment is concerned, and bringing together that doctrine of inclusivity, as David wants to put it. But let me also say that we have a constitution. This constitution puts in place measures as to how we're going to get a government. That can only be done through an election. We've already done an election, and I don't think anyone would question the legitimacy of the president's win. That is a gone story. We don't have to go back there. But I hear him. I actually feel that he talks about inclusivity. Inclusivity does not mean one person. Neither does it mean one community. It's about each and every Kenyan, the 45 million Kenyans that we have. And the president, in his wisdom, must be minded of the fact that we have different tribes in Kenya, and bring on board these parties so that all of us can feel included. But one thing I would like to ask David is, we have devolution. This constitution brought about devolution so that money can be transported down to the mwananchi. That is why we have Governor Anyang' Nyong'o in Kisumu, and in Siaya, and every other place, in Meru, in Machakos, and everywhere else. So why don't they ask about this devolution? How far have we gone for the last 5 years that we've had devolution? So let us not just imagine you can only be represented at the national government for you to be included in government. We are looking at devolution. We are looking at the monies that are going to the counties, 94% of the national kitty, and be able to feel that this government really cares for each and every person. But as for dialogue, there is always a beginning. It is about Kenyans, not about one person, and I think this government would be willing to go to whatever measure, to take whatever measure to be able to bring the Kenyans together, so that all of us, we don't want to talk about chaos, we don't want to see Kenyans fighting, we don't need a parallel rally, so that now we get to understand that somebody's power must be felt. Tomorrow is a special day. Let us come together as Kenyans and be able to sway in our president.
I'll allow Mark's rebuttal.
You know, this country is a country that is specialist in false flags. The reality of the matter, our politics is tribal. Our enmity is tribal. We may call it electoral reform, we may call it injustice, we may call it whatever it is we want. But the feeling has always been that when Moi was president, Baringo became super wealthy. It's one of the poorest counties in this country. Let's understand one thing, and this is very critical to understand, that we need to differentiate between perception and fact. The perception that Kenya is not inclusive is a bit dicey, and I'll tell you why it's dicey. If you look at in terms of road network, very few parts of this country can say there's been no advancement. The northern part of the country for the longest time was ignored, but that is changing. If we look at energy and energy distribution in this country, it would be a lie to say that certain parts of this country have been favored. In fact, if we were to talk about the politics of exclusion, we would have to talk about the pastoral communities and the northern part of Kenya. If those guys were complaining, then maybe they have a basis. But the truth of the matter is this: we need to get to a point where we understand that inclusion is not two things. Number one, it is not the opportunity for me to put my guy in office for him to propagate nepotism. That cannot be inclusion. It cannot be, let's put Willis in the office because I'm Willis's cousin, I'll get a job. That is not inclusion. The second part that we need to also disabuse is this: inclusion is not having someone in office because of his tribe. Inclusion is having someone in office because of his competence. And that drives my third point. Inclusion is this: if development and the national agenda is met, then we need to recognize out of 21 cabinet positions, we cannot have 44 tribes. Okay, and when we realize that as a nation our inclusion should be Wamalwa, who is a Luya, how much water projects is he doing across the country, not for the Luya. That's why we keep mistaking it. Inclusion should be about can every Kenyan get into it, and the only way we can do it is we have to get to the basic reality that even if you talk about historical injustices or new injustices, you got to deal with two things. You've got to deal with tribalism and you've got to deal with corruption. That every Kenyan can agree with, because if you deal with corruption, you also deal with the issue where certain people have felt entitled, where resources have not been spent well. You see, if resources are spent well, it will not matter to us whether it is a Dorobo, an Akorino, a Makonde who becomes president. And that's the key issue.
And also, you just brought about something in before David speaks. You've talked about perception and fact, and the reality is as well that there are people who, of course, like Francis said, we have to move on, and there is the swearing in tomorrow. There's still the other section of Kenyans that is the big task to unite. Now we have this cause of dialogue, but the perception has been that kama mtu wetu hayuko huko juu, yuko nje. How do
let me first, no, I don't want to sound intellectually arrogant. Let me quite explain how we've gotten to this point and why exclusion of parts of the country have been the greatest, they're the ones, that exclusion has been the major cause.
And you're referring to
entrenched tribalism.
Inclusion in
exactly
in what? Yeah.
When the former presidents of this country were in power, start with President Kenyatta, Johnston Kamau Kenyatta. President Kenyatta, being in power at his time, it is fact that his cabinet was so much of his tribe that it is believed and written in many books that it was addressed in Gikuyu. At the time, all the generals and leaders of different functions of the state were from the Kikuyu culture. When Moi came into power, to try and prove that he also had reminded his people, even though he tried to be as inclusive as possible. In fact, Moi really tried, but he first wiped out the Kikuyu leadership and brought in his people, so that from the army to everything else was led by Moi's Kalenjin men. The people who held the wings of power then were his people. What this did was to entrench the false belief, I call it false for what it is, that we are only edified and we only gain when one of us is in power. So, whereas it may be true to an extent that there are parts of the countries from which these two people came that may still be behind, the truth is also that most of these places, when you go to places like Marigat, my friend, and other places of Baringo, there are places that had a tarmac road that had no vehicles to even use those areas. So today they are used kuanika, maize so that it dries. It's a fact. It was wastage of resources. Did that translate to economic empowerment of the people? Certainly not as much. But did it give them processes that would enable that economic development? Truly it did. Now that is how tribalism has been entrenched, so that then people believe we may have a semblance of inclusion if one of us is there. And it's a retrogressive thing. I do not like it. I don't advocate for it. And as I talk about exclusion, it's not because my name starts with O. I want Mark to take a walk today. Go to Gatondo Level 4 hospital. Level 4. The equivalent of a district hospital in his village. Then go compare it with Tarakaniti Level 5. Then you will see why I say that there's been lack of this inclusion, and that even some Jubilee supporters may think they're included, but they're excluded. Then it's a fact that we need to talk about. Now, when we talk about devolution,
is your example something that happened recently, or can we attribute it like Florence said to devolution?
No, Tarakaniti. Now I'm coming to Florence. Believe that devolution can sort out some of these problems, and I want to ask Florence, what amount is given to the county for doing tarmac roads? None. It's a function of the national state. How much, for example, does Tarakaniti get? It's the tiniest county. it gets meager, almost zero. Of course, there has been incompetence in the parts of governance. But when you have devolved only 15% of the national budget to 47 counties and keep 85% at the control and whims of the presidency, and then tell people, look away, don't worry, don't care about here, we must get to a point where, because it seems we have accepted that we are in a marriage of, we are in a come we stay, not even a marriage. That this country is in a come we stay, and Mark does not want to cure what is ailing us. He wants us, Florence wants us to move on to the evolution. It seems we have appreciated that we hate each other. Let's concentrate in our little units. We cannot mend this and fix it. The truth is, our presidency must get to that point of mending the country so that we appreciate each other for what we are, not merely our cultures, beyond that. And when we do that, we will have put a plebiscite for this nation to be able to grow. Devolution will only make sense if we have a peaceful country. If the country is torn apart, then that devolution will count for extremely zero. And Mark must not abuse affirmative action. There is a reason we have the word affirmative action. So it's not about who. When you have a deeply ethnocentric country where people first think of each other as tribesmen, then what you do is to take the hit. The most brilliant can be a Luo. The most brilliant can be a Mijikenda. But when the Dorobo feel they've been excluded and you have someone who is quite brilliant, he may not have a doctorate but he has a master's, you give him the chance. Give him the chance not because he's incompetent and merely because of his tribe, but because you want to build a cohesive nation. That's what affirmative action is. It is a cure for some crisis.
No, I think that whatever David has said, with due respect, is very good for our thesis. If we were right we were in class, that would be very good for students.
But thesis is what builds sessional papers that develop countries.
I was in the last parliament and we were doing the budget and for devolution, and the amount that went to the counties was 34%. As at the last budget, that is what we gave to the counties. So really, what he should be telling us in his county, the amount of money that was received. Health is a devolved function. Water is a devolved function. How much of that has he seen in his county? Tharaka Nithi has 3 constituencies. Lamu has 2 constituencies. Isiolo County has 2 constituencies. Money is given depending on the population of that county and other factors that are considered. So whatever money is, Meru County has 9 constituencies. So we could be getting much more money. But go to Turkana. Turkana gets, like the last time it got 12 billion shillings. How much has it helped in terms of devolution? If I go to Meru County, the 8 billion that we received, how much has it gone to help my county? But when it comes to roads is not just a devolved function. They are national roads and they are county roads. So you should be asking yourself, how much has the national government done in terms of the roads that is supposed to take care of? So honestly, it is good that we appreciate how far devolution has taken us, and also appreciate the fact that all these other factors considered, we cannot wipe them within one day. We cannot go for a prayer rally and imagine that once we've done that, then now that is enough. We've done away with tribalism. We have brought inclusivity. So, because the question is, tomorrow's function, we say that NASA has a function. It is a mourning day for them. Our president has said tomorrow, it's not just, we are not saying we are celebrating, we are just going there to bring all Kenyans together. Why can't our president, who has invited the former prime minister to this function tomorrow, why can't he attend? Let's see Honorable Raila Odinga, if he is a patriot, if he loves this country, attending tomorrow's function. I'm challenging him and sending him to you. I'm sending you to him. Please tell him when you meet him today, because I know you shall, that he's been invited for tomorrow's function. Let us see him there tomorrow. We shall celebrate with him. We shall sing with him. And we are going to tell him the way forward that the president has set in place to take this country for the next 5 years.
All right, Florence is behaving like someone who steals your wife and tells you, come for for the wedding tomorrow.
Yes, Mark.
You know,
And then we
the cabinet had among others Jomo Kenyatta, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Murumbi, okay, Mackenzie, it had Mungai, it had Tomboy, it had Notiende, it had Anayodo, he had Julius Kiano, he had Mwanyumba, and he had Jackson Angaine. This
1964 to 1970.
Let me
That's 1971 to 1978.
Okay,
let me finish. let me finish. Let's not forget that Oginga Odinga moved out of cabinet in 1968. That's not what we're debating. What I'm saying is this. When you take a blanket statement, and this is the problem of painting things with a broad stroke, is you take a picture and then you begin to change how Kenya is perceived. Because the reality of the matter is this, that as a nation, if we need to move forward, genuinely move forward, the first thing we must do is appreciate above all else is the nature of our tribal politics that we need to deal.
Sure.
Unless we deal with that, everything that he's talking about will be subject to perception and inflections that will never bring us to a point where we can agree. Because at the end of the day, if I dislike Osiani and he says hi to me, I'll begin to dissect how strongly he squeezed my hand, how close he pulled me, because I already have an emotional bias against him. That's the first thing. When we appreciate that, then we can begin to deal with what is inclusion correctly. Today as we speak, there's a CRA document that states how counties should receive devolved funds. There's a minimum of 15% set by the Constitution. Okay? Our desire as a nation is to see it go as high as possible. And that is what we should all push our government to be. Whether you're in Jubilee or NASA, the more funds are devolved to our county governments, the better. But even then, let us remember that our county governments themselves are not being managed well. Why? Because of our man principle. We elected our man. Do you know what happens when your man gets on top? You cannot question him because he acts like your father, not like your servant. And when he acts like your father and you're African, you can never question him. What needs to happen? We need to get to a point in this country where first and foremost, the person we need to hold to account most is our man. Any person who voted for Jubilee should now be the person who's forcing Jubilee to deliver on their manifesto. Any person who voted for Raila Odinga should be pushing Raila Odinga for the same electoral reforms within the body of NASA, for the same transparency within the body of NASA. Let us hold our leaders to the standard they say.
All right, we're going to take a short musical break. So
Just a rebuttal, just a short one. You know, Mika Chesarem, I don't want Florence to get away with this 34% allocation. Because Mika Chesarem had the greatest fight of his life as the chair of the Commission for Revenue Allocation. And whereas the government kept saying that they have hinged their 15% on the previous year's audited budget, Mika Chesarem appealed constantly, time and again, that please let us allocate 15% of the national budget. So that if we had 30% or anything close, as Florence said, now we would have 600 billion devolved. But what do? They anchor it on the previous budget, audited accounts of the previous year, which is almost half of the country's budget. The net effect is that we are being dishonest. The truth is, if we were committed to devolution indeed, then we would have listened to the Commission on Revenue Allocation when they first asked that we devolve at least just 15% of the national budget to the counties. Not of audited budgets of the previous year, which is half, which is just another joke altogether. Then let's come back and talk the others.
Yes, we're going to come back and
we're
going to come back and talk about that as well. And also, we want to also just take a look at, the NASA say they're going to move forward. The police say it's illegal. And also, there is some 2022 politics when it comes to picking off the next cabinet, which already Mark has given us how it looked in 1964. We want to look at how it will look in 2017 going forward.